Who's the worst main character we're supposed to sympathize with? Story 1. The kids from the Trix cereal commercials. All the rabbit wants to do is eat some cereal, but the kids won't let him just because he's a rabbit. Racist pricks. I remember when I was like somewhere between 6 to 10 years old or so, my parents took me to some kind of business convention, and one of the booths showing was, I guess, the cereal company that makes Trix, because they had someone dressed up as the Trix rabbit for a mascot. I got some Trix, which I think they were giving out samples, and then I kept trying to insist that he take it, because I kept thinking or possibly even telling him that those evil kids on the commercials are always taking away his cereal and all he wants is some cereal. So here, you can have mine. Story 2. Emily from Emily in Paris. She fucks up and barely suffers the consequences. Sleeping with a friend's partners and still remains friends with both of them openly. Screws up business opportunities, nothing besides a slap on the wrists, and somehow it's magically resolved. And her whole, I am a dumb American Bon Apple Tea, and she dresses like if Harry Styles was colorblind. Story 3. Mark from Rent. I love Rent, but as I get older the more ridiculous it gets. Mark is a rich kid who has parents that love him, but he runs off to cosplay as someone who is poor to make films, which is really just him pointing his camera at poor people all day. He doesn't think he should have to pay rent to Benny because they were friends, and he let them stay for free for a long time, and he thinks that should just last forever? Then he finally gets a job but quits because it was selling out. Ugh. Story 4. Jax Teller from Sons of Anarchy. Dude's son straight up got kidnapped and his wife got injured to the point she couldn't perform surgeries because his stepdad put a hit out on her, and it still wasn't enough for him to leave his dumb motorcycle club. His wife begged him to leave for their safety and he wouldn't. She tried to leave on her own with her children and he stopped her. Then she ends up getting murdered by his psycho mom. Dude was a straight up POS. Story 5. I would have said Nate from Ted Lasso, but the show caught my vibe and turned him into the antagonist. I hope he doesn't get a redemption arc. I think that we will also see Ted angry, hurt, frustrated, and disappointed by at least some of Nate's actions and behavior, and that's just as important. One of the things I really like about the show is that Ted is affected by what happens. He has the full range of emotions and is capable of being wrong in how he handles things. He isn't perfect or a Zen master, etc., but he works through it. He changes his thought process. He learns from events and his own reactions to them. It isn't about a perfect person being perfect. It's a flawed but genuinely good person trying his best to make things better for everyone around him, even when things don't go his way. Nate's whole thing is he grew up without ever being good enough for his father. No matter what he did, his mother would blanket support him without really understanding the achievement, and his father would basically say it's not good enough. He transferred, like most people, his parental neglect to Ted, who saw him for his football analysis, uplifted him, and made him assistant coach. That should have been enough. He's a valued member of the team, respected, and paid. However, because he's basically making Ted and his father the same person, any sign of neglect, no constant affirmation, not putting him in the spotlight all the time, etc., Nate sees Ted as doing exactly what his father did. That's why he's going into this villain arc. He's always been broken by his father, and he'll always see mentors' fathers as neglectful. You can also see this model in how he treats the new equipment manager. Rather than empathize with him because Nate was also in that position, he acts like his own father and makes sure the manager knows nothing he does is good enough. Point is, Nate is just as broken as everyone else in the show, and punishing him for that in the end would be a major misstep. Nate's either going to come home or finally learn and grow away from Ted. Story 6. Rory Gilmore. Whiny, narcissistic, cheated on multiple boyfriends. In hindsight, it's not a surprise she turned out how she did with everyone powdering her ass from day one of the show. The way she collapsed because one whole person told her she wasn't cut out for the career she wanted was proof of that. In any other show, that would be the point where the protagonist digs deeps to remember why they wanted that dream, or realize their talents were better suited for something else. Instead, Rory trashes a boat, quits Yale for half the year, moves in with her grandparents because Lorelai put a foot up her ass for once, and then spun her wheels for the next decade after graduation, doing nothing of note while thinking her farts smelled of roses. Mitchum did absolutely nothing wrong, and boy was he ever vindicated in the sequel. Story 7. Tom Cruise in Risky Business. There's a setup in the beginning. He's in some business class where they're supposed to come up with some business idea. Then his parents go away for the weekend. Cue that famous scene. Tom Cruise, the protagonist and high school student, orders a prostitute. The prostitute turns out to be a man, but that prostitute gives him another number to call and he finally gets a girl, and they bang. Something happens where Cruz now needs money. He and the prostitute he's befriended decide to start a brothel in his parents' house. A brothel that caters exclusively to Cruz's high school friends. They make the money they need and then some. Parents come home none the wiser. We end with Tom Cruise back in the business class failing the assignment because he was busy doing the whole child brothel thing, but ends with a voiceover where he's proudly saying how much money he actually made. Turns out he actually was a businessman. Story 8. If we assume that Greg is a reliable narrator, which based on his character he most likely isn't, then yes, his parents are awful. His dad lives in a mental state that shifts between denial of his children's failures, which Teen Slate as his own failures, and hackneyed attempts at making them live up to his outdated expectations, which he only has because he sees other people meet those expectations. When he's not ignoring Greg altogether, he's forcing him into activities, usually sports or sports-like, just so he can appear like a good dad. Greg's mom is even worse. She's somehow in complete denial of her kids being terrible, and she's meddlesome to the point of obsession. She has quirky dreams about being a band family, or about her family being exemplary so she can write about them in the newspaper column. But SJ doesn't realize, or refuses to, that her oldest child is one step away from being a drug addict. Let's face it, if the books weren't YA, he would totally be a meth head. And her middle child can't even rise to mediocrity, which leaves her with her last hope, Manny, who himself is a little jerk who knows he can manipulate his mom into doing whatever he says, like naming their dog Sweetie despite the whole family being against it. Like her husband, she doesn't bother to learn or understand her kids' interests and hobbies. Though TBF, Greg has one hobby, and it's video games, and it's kind of the point, so he comes across as a bit pathetic. And simultaneously, half the time she fades into the background as a classic 1950s stay-at-home mom. Roderick is painted as a hard rock guy, and us adult readers can for sure assume that he does drugs, gets drunk, and has porno mags stashed under his bed, which were PG-ed in the movie to be biker magazines with bikini girls. And as I said, Manny is a little jerk. Now, all of this is assuming Greg is being 100% honest and reliable, but he's not. He never has been and never will be. It's part of his character. He's a schemer and a liar in a way that's pathological at times. He has no real interests other than video games, and he always imagines himself being rich and famous for reasons. He's also very mean to those around him, especially Rowley, and he never really gets any major comeuppance for it. Sure, he gets a minor punishment, but then he proceeds to do the same thing again with also minor consequences. And by minor I mean being grounded as opposed to being IDK expelled from school. Are his parents that bad? I'd say no. The dad is the classic working man stereotype who likes sports ball. Greg sees his dad that way because Greg himself never makes any effort to relate to his dad. The mom is a 1950s sitcom housewife because, again, that's how Greg sees her. Roderick is probably the least accurate of all. From actual events in the books, we know Roderick has trouble with girls, and that girls don't like him, so he too is kind of a dork in his way. He's mean to Greg, but we have no reason to believe he's that crazy other than Greg's word. He just plays the mean older brother role, and as such he has a rock band, has a van, is in high school, and is mean. Manny, likewise, is the baby brother. He's the darling of the house, can do no wrong, and everyone bows to his wishes, which Manny himself exploits. Frankly, I think the first 3 movies did a great job humanizing every character. Frank is a dork, but he's still a person. He still makes mistakes, and he still takes time to spend with his kids, even if he doesn't understand them. Helen is quirky and weird, but she's not the meddling nutjob from the books. Roderick is portrayed as a fake hard rock star. Sure, he talks big, but ultimately he's just a kid with an overconfident facade. He's still responsible to an extent, and he still respects his parents enough that when they ground him, he abides by it. Even Greg, our titular narcissistic Machiavellian manipulator, gets some humanity and some much-needed development. The point of the books is for us to laugh at Greg, not with him. So naturally, he has to be just a little unlikable so we don't feel too bad about him. He makes a scheme, it backfires, he gets a minor rebuke, we laugh, he moves on. He never learns or grows, and that's part of the charm. We laugh at Greg the same way we laugh at Wile E. Coyote. He just keeps trying, and then when he's about to, he fails. It hurts, we laugh, and then next scene he's up and ready with another scheme. Story 9. Eleanor Guthrie from Black Sails. We're supposed to root for her because of the situations she's often in, struggling as an independent woman in a ruthless man's world of the 1700s. But she fucks over her supposed friends and everyone that's ever tried to help her at every opportunity, then turns around and is shocked, horrified, and plays the victim when they do it back. Classic narcissist. Story 10. Jerry from Tom and Jerry. Now, nothing in the Tom and Jerry verse is really consistent, and a lot of their dynamic depends on whichever studio did the episode. But I remember a lot of times when Tom wasn't really trying to seriously hurt Jerry, he was usually toying with him like cats do, or if he'd crossed the line, he would immediately feel bad about it, and then save Jerry himself. Meanwhile, Jerry, the little fuck we're supposed to root for, uses that to his advantage to lure Tom into situations that genuinely would have killed him, if not for cartoon immortality. Story 11. Chris Pratt in the movie Passengers. Out of pure selfishness, the dude decides to ruin the bright future of a girl so that she has no other option than to live with him. She'll never accomplish the great projects she had. She'll never see any of her loved ones. She'll never be able to even talk to another human being. She will live in prison for the rest of her days. While the movie hints at the fact that he's a selfish asshole, it's largely overbalanced by the idea that a man's got to do what he's got to do to pursue his own happiness. In the end, her Stockholm Syndrome is presented as a happily ever after ending. Story 12. Grandpa Joe. Lazy prick stayed glued to the bed until his grandson got the golden ticket. Meanwhile, Charlie's mom is working her tail off supporting the entire family. It was intended to be a wholesome, feel-good moment because poor Grandpa finally worked up the energy to get up and spend some time with his grandson on a free trip, but instead, it's irritating. Story 13. The entire cast of How I Met Your Mother. I never really saw the show back when it came out, so I binge-watched most seasons in one go. All of them are just insufferable, petty, and toxic. Ted and Lily in particular were absolutely unbearable. Maybe people like the show because they've grown up with it, but I just found the sociopathic behavior cringe. Story 14. Claire from Outlander. She's a time-traveling physician hurled back 200 years into the past. She is impulsive, reckless, and tactless, but selfishness is probably her defining characteristic. Claire frequently flip-flops from wanting to preserve the timeline to preserving her own self-interests. She destroys other people's lives to further her goals. Being confrontational is a core aspect of her character, and she makes enemies wherever she goes, drawing her family into unimaginable danger and suffering. You would think a secret time traveler would be discreet. In the latest season, they even had to address it, where she asks her past husband if she's terrible or not, and lists all of the bullshittery she's caused over the years. Story 15. Severus Snape. He was neo-Nazi incel who wanted the girl to love him despite running with wizarding Hitler who wanted to commit Holocaust on her kind. When he learnt that her son is targeted, he begged for her life alone, not her child or husband whom he wished dead anyway. Then he bullied her son for 7 years and the other child whom he indirectly orphaned and literally every non-Slytherin kid for close to 2 decades. But all should be forgotten because he said always.